Okay, this video is going to show how to use pseudocode to help set up the writing of a program. And so we're going to use an example, the allowance calculator program, to do that. And so if we look at the instructions of the program, you're going to write a program where the person is asked to roll a pair of dice, and then that whatever the roll is going to determine how much is going to be added to their allowance. And so as you can see here, it says that the current allowance is $14. And so if we were writing pseudocode for that part of it, we would say just something like declare and initialize a variable to store this week's allowance to be 14. And so that what would happen is when you go to write your code, you would just write the Java code that does deal with that or represents what you just wrote here for pseudocode. And then the next thing it says is that you've got to prompt the user for the amount of the roll of the dice and then store it in a variable. So again, you just write Java code when you go to write your program that would accomplish that. Then it says now we go into the part to where the compiler has to make a decision, and this is where I want to major on the pseudocode and in a possible way to do this. And so we're going to use an if-else structure that will calculate and store the updated allowance. And so now of course this is a simple illustration, but our programs are going to get more complicated, and so we want to learn this on a simpler program and approach if you're having a tough time deciding how to write or even where to start when asked to write an if-else structure. And so for me, the thing that's helped other students in the past is to write the alternatives, in other words the possible options from which the compiler has to choose, to write those down first, which is the opposite in the way that the code is going to be normally written, or the way it's the order in which it would be compiled. But we want to write down, well, what are the possible things, choices the compiler has to choose from. So as you look at this, it says that if you roll a 10, 11, or 12, they will add $10 to your allowance. Otherwise, they're going to add 3. So what you should see in there is that there's two choices. Either the compiler is going to be add 10 or add 3. And so we would write pseudocode in here. You could set it up like this. Inside the if clause area, you could say add $10 to the current allowance. Okay, so you're going to have to write code that actually does that. But this gives you an idea what to do. And then the other option is add 3 to the current allowance. So what you have here are the two options. And that's why we're going to use an if-else structure, is because there's only two options. And so either the compiler is going to add 10 to the current allowance, or it's going to add 3 to the current allowance. Now what you do, now you go in this, as we say down here, that now we're going to write the condition or the Boolean expression that must be true in order for the compiler to choose that first option. So you look at this. In order to add 10 to the current allowance, what has to be true? And as you look at the instructions, it says to roll a 10, an 11, or a 12. When you write your Boolean expression, even as the pseudocode, it is a good idea to use a relational or comparison operator, because that just makes it easier and less to have to write. And so we would say, and so you think, okay, what can we write in here that would say 10, 11, or 12? And so essentially what you can do is you can say that the roll is greater than or equal to 10. So if that roll is equal to 10 or it's greater than 10, because the only other options are 10 or 11 and 12, and so if it's greater than 10, then then that means if this is true, the compiler is going to add 10, and then it's going to ignore this clause right here. And so this is the way you can set it up in pseudocode, is to set up the possible options first, then determine what must be true in that Boolean expression to make it choose or pick door number 1, so to speak, to pick that first option. And then the last thing it says is after the if-else structure. So you want to write a pseudocode after the if-else structure, and it's going to says to display the updated balance. So display the updated weekly allowance. And so this would be the pseudocode. Now you would go and you would write your program using Java code based on this pseudocode. Now pseudocode is all that is false code. It's not code that the compiler can read. And so we're going to turn it into actual source code that the compiler can read and convert to bytecode, etc. Alright, so that is it for this part.